This is Ravi Shankar. As I travel around the world, I feel that the young people are searching for the means with which to attain peace, happiness, and spiritual awareness. Why not get high on life itself without using any drugs? You young ones, you have the elixir of life. You don't need hard drugs to make your life more meaningful.
Fair use is a doctrine in the United States copyright law that allows limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders, such as for commentary, criticism, news reporting, research, teaching, or scholarship. It provides for the legal, non-licensed citation or incorporation of copyrighted material in another author's work.
It's almost time. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off.
Welcome to the Silver Halide Show. My name is John. I'm the host and producer. Thank you for downloading and listening. The website is TheSilverHalideShow.blogspot.com, where you can find show notes and all archived episodes. I would very much like to hear from listeners, whether you have questions, comments, or suggestions, or if you would like to discuss a film for a future show. The email address is all one word, lowercase, TheSilverHalideShow@gmail.com. This is podcast number 4 on Jacob's Ladder, directed by Adrian Lyne, released in 1990. I fell in love with Jacob's Ladder sometime in the late 90s. I'd never heard about it, I knew nothing about it, and I only caught it from halfway point. It was on local cable, green pen and scan version. I've never seen the film in the theater. But it became one of those films for me that had a mood, a tone, a feeling, a sensibility to it, where not only did I admire it and really enjoy it, and of course I would probably list it in my top 10, but more than that, it's a film that I can and do go back to and watch again and again. Whether I find new things in the film or not is not so much important. It's not so much like a Kubrick film. But for me, it's a very comfortable film to get into, to be inside, to live in, to be with the characters, experience the story, hear some of these lines again. There's a great minimalist synthesizer score by Maurice Jarre, the famous composer of Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, amongst a million others. But it was interesting what he was doing in the 80s with his contribution to Witness and Fatal Attraction in this film. Very minimalist synthesizer type of work that is not often spoken about or referred to. But I finally saw a good version on DVD in the early millennium, and of course now I have the film on Blu-ray, and it looks even better. I still would like to see it in the theater sometime, though. I have to admit I'm not a huge Adrian Lyne fan. I like some of his films, others I could very easily do without. So this is a special film for me where I'm not so much coming from the perspective of following a director. This is kind of a one-off. But I believe he brings perfect sensibilities to the film. Adrian Lyne has a lot of European artistic sensibility. Of course, he's often labeled with sort of gauzy 80s cinematography and high concept, high style, soap opera type of dramas or melodramas. But this film is different. This film is very unusual in his filmography or canon. and again is not spoken about or referred to often, not reviewed very often. I guess it is somewhat of a cult film, but even at that, it seems to have been quite forgotten. I think Tim Robbins was a perfect decision to cast as the lead, because he has a very expressive, emotive face, sort of like Martin Sheen. And this is very important in a film like this, because not only as a viewer are we going to be rudderless going through this film and sort of very uneasy, but so is the character. And so much in film we depend on the characters for stability while navigating through the story. And so if we can very easily and clearly read his emotions and feelings, and if he is sort of endearing to us, or at least interesting, that, as I say, this is a great help to us as a viewer, but also is a great compliment to the film as a more interior type of acting. I don't think would flesh out the role very well. Elizabeth Pena I haven't really seen in many films before or since, but her performance in the film is very underrated, because while she's not the main character, she is very much the audience's point of view of Jacob. And so we very much identify with her reactions and feelings while going through this. She is able to portray a very easy, sentimental, free relationship with Jacob, and it's very believable that the two of them are a couple, even though they're extreme opposites, not just in height. But also she is able to play the sort of, I think, the type of girlfriend we would all like to have, who is very supportive and caring and somewhat wise, but also very sexy and vivacious. Danny Aiello, of course, we know from many films in the 80s and 90s. I haven't seen him in a film for a long time. I don't know if he retired or passed on, but in my opinion, this might be his best film, or his best role, or his best work. I know many people are fond of his work in Moonstruck. He is able to play the angel, or the shepherd, for Jacob in this film. Once again, not an easy role, because one could very easily overplay it as an actor, and the part is written as such where we understand who this character is. Not much has to be portrayed, and yet Aiello is able to interact with Robbins in the film like two old buddies, very understanding, and it's at the same time sort of a mentor-pupil relationship. Aiello speaks of respecting Jacob's intelligence very much and being disappointed he hasn't continued his education. And of course he's the one who saves him from the hospital. Macaulay Culkin was a great choice for this film, although it's interesting because he doesn't have very many lines. Most of his acting is without words, and yet he's able to deliver a very strong performance that, I'm not going to be cheesy and say I cry every time I see the film, but this is certainly one of those few films where I actually do cry, especially at the end, because he is so, it's not a matter of cuteness, he is so endearing as a child. He's, the archetype type of boy a father would want to have, who's very curious but also quite sensitive. And to pull it off at that age, I know it was before Home Alone, is quite amazing. And another memorable aspect to the film, the Vietnam vets are an interesting collection, somewhat like Platoon, or Full Metal Jacket, all these Vietnam films where they find sort of character or B actors to portray a gang of different people, and some very interesting choices of Eric LaSalle and Ving Rhames and even Pruitt Taylor Vince. However, I go back to Tim Robbins playing Jacob Singer because definitely he's the main character of the film and the anchor, and we are so easily able to experience everything vicariously through him in the film. Once again, because of having such an open face with open feelings and emotions, but he has a smile and a grin that are able to bring you in as a viewer. I don't want to be too artsy or precious about this. It's sort of difficult to define for me, I suppose. I'm not a huge fan of gauzy cinematography, the sort of the staple of 80s movies, very high concept, flashy type things, but this film, it does work. This, again, as I say, is very pastel and sort of murky. However, it works for this film because we are sort of somewhat in a haze or in a smoke, and most of the film is shot on either tripod or dolly. There's very little handheld. And it's also very interesting, or very important to note, that the way the film is shot, all the visions of demons or hellish things are seen from Jacob's point of view. We see them as he sees them, or through his eyes, which is a very important concept in the shooting mechanics of the film. Not only to place the viewer in Jacob's shoes, but also be able to maintain the reality that these may be things that he is just seeing and that aren't real. For me, the sets and locations aren't necessarily too remarkable or memorable, except in total that they do represent a very excellent depiction of a sort of a late 70s or mid 70s even, sort of dirty, I don't know, New York or Philadelphia or Boston, a very grim, cold, bleak concrete, everything's deteriorating, weathered, dirty, this kind of stuff. And so it's an interesting mix of these sort of harsh reality, hard reality, French Connection type locations and sets, and then photographing them in a gauzy, like French perfume commercial type of cinematography. Sort of the idea of trying to beautifully capture grim reality, which we would see, done later in Seven and obviously copied many times after that since. So the film, therefore, is at times or altogether beautiful, and yet at other times is completely bleak and dark and horrifying. Yet, because of the methods involved in the shooting and the creation of the environments, whether it be by costume or decor or just location, that they were able to pull off an amazing feat in making it a slight version of our own reality with just slight surreal ambiguities or demonic tinges or biblical darkness in a sense. I think it's important to discuss a few of the set pieces here. Very early on into the film, after the opening Vietnam scene, and I'll make a note here that I don't think the Vietnam scenes in Jacob's Ladder are anything too stunning or remarkable or memorable. I wouldn't either say they're derivative. They are sort of, they stand on their own. But there's nothing, inventive or terribly unique or original about it. However, when it cuts to Jacob on the subway, I won't say we all can, but I would say certainly I can. I've been on trains late at night like that, where there's nobody on the train and you've fallen asleep and you don't know exactly where you are. We can all identify, I think, with that sort of out of place. And it's very interesting setting it on a train, because you could just as well have him wake up in the middle of sleeping in his bed or any other things. But having it be on a train implies movement, and in this sense, being underground, going through tunnels, there can be a sense of timelessness, or the idea of moving between worlds and whatnot. So opening on a man traveling underground and not being aware of place and time is a very interesting step to go, in terms of being completely opposite from the opening scene in Vietnam, which was very loud, lush, manic, frantic, and somewhat comfortable in places. Important to note also that it's not spoken of very often that when Jacob wakes up on the subway, he is reading Camus' The Stranger. The chiropractic scenes in the film at Louis' office are fantastically realized, in the sense of they are totally realistic to the experience of being at a chiropractor and being treated chiropractically. It's undeniable that some of the elements are accentuated for the film. But yeah, you do hear those loud cracks and pops. And no, the chiropractor is not actually cracking bones. What it is you develop a buildup of nitrogen in your joints, and by manipulating them, you release that nitrogen, and therefore the tensions, so the muscles relax. But anyhow, when you leave a chiropractor, you feel like $1 million. You feel like you have a new spine. And so these scenes in the film that have Jacob being cured and treated while being spoken to with wisdom and loving care by his angel or chiropractor. It's a very interesting take on the doctor-patient relationship, and the idea of healing not only through physical manipulation, but as well as emotional or mental healing. The party scene is what blew me away the first time I saw the film, because even though I didn't necessarily understand what was going on in the story or some of the meanings and such, this party perfectly illustrates my idea of what a house party would be like in the late 70s, with somebody with a really maxed out stereo system blaring, James Brown funk party music or disco stuff, and everybody in high heels and leather and polyester. But yet it's in a house, and we've all been to those kind of crowded parties that are in houses where there's not necessarily one designated room, and you will take the staircase to go to the bathroom, and you will meet a fortune teller on the stairs. But for me, it was just the scenes on the dance floor with that James Brown song pumping, and flash cuts, strobe effect of the light. Again, this blue, gauzy cinematography, but it puts you and makes you feel right there in the scene on the dance floor, and it becomes increasingly more manic and intense with the flash cuts to the people with the gyrating heads, or the bird in the cage, and then his girlfriend turning into this monster in front of him. And it's all done in these very interesting flash cuts that, again, rely on the technique of show the audience a little and let them fill in the rest with their own mind, because their mind is and will create a more scary feel than any film could do anyhow. And the scene immediately after the party scene in the bathtub, definitely the first time in my life where I saw in a film a depiction of a sort of a human moment that was right on the line, or sort of the very edge of what someone could tolerate. The intensity, pressure, feeling of dying, not dying, like suffocating or drowning. And it was all so well carried off in this scene where there's some great elegiac, haunting opera soprano music again from Jarre, but here it is again, this dilapidated apartment, this rundown bathtub, and he's thrown in, and all these strange people coming in and pouring ice on top of him while he's in this feverish state. We cannot help as a viewer but be right there and experience that. And I know I've seen the film several times with other people that when the scene is over and it cuts to Jacob in bed and it's very quiet and such, most viewers take a deep breath or shift in their seat or whatnot. It has maximum emotional impact and resonance. And finally, the hospital. I guess I would call it the Halloween hospital. It is sort of like a hospital that gets worse and worse as you go more and more into it. I guess they kind of explored that concept with Shutter Island recently. But anyhow, I know it was a disused hospital and they dressed it up, but one hell of a job again. This film is very consistent in being able to employ methods to give you the sense of dread, anticipation, scariness, fear, also uneasiness. We're not exactly sure because in this film there are so many different times, realities, places that we always are contemplating, is this real? Is this happening? Did this happen before? Is this just a memory? And so forth and so on. And the hospital is a perfect culmination of this, where all the elements seem to be coming back to him at once, as again he goes deeper and deeper into the hospital and the conditions get worse and worse and the things he sees gets worse and worse. One could also see it as a sort of a augmentation and repetition on the bathtub scene, although with even more increased effects on the viewer, or should I say participant. So I am in no way going to come to some sort of conclusion statement of what the film is about or what my opinion of the meaning of the film is, because that leads me into my final point, which is why I love this film so much and why I believe it's such a well-made film, well-realized film, and should be seen more. It stuns me that it's not used in film school, because it's a perfect lesson in how to use flashback, flash forward, alternate reality, these types of what some reviewers would call gimmicks, because they are often employed amateurishly or badly, are so well done in this film that it shows you the possibilities, that they aren't hackneyed if they are done in an original way. But I love films that are ambiguous or have some sort of ability to stay with you after and allow you to contemplate things about the film. I don't like wrapped up films at the end that tell me what the ending is or how to feel about it or what to think or what happened after, etc., etc. This film, because of the way it opens, it's very earthy, very brutal early on, and this lets you know that it's a very realistic film, but yet we're never told anything about Jacob or about the characters. Everything is presented to us as a viewer for the first time. We are unaware. Sometimes we are let in on things that the main character may not be aware of. I can particularly think of the scene outside the court steps where we're taken inside the front of a car that's monitoring all the Vietnam vets talking on the stairs there and drives away. But this isn't used too often, and neither is it too important to discuss, I don't think. So in the end, what they're able to achieve is this film where you feel so incredibly sympathetic for this man, not only because of what has happened to him in the past and what is happening to him now, but because we can so easily identify with him because he's a nice guy and his circumstances are somewhat familiar or identifiable to people, that we care so much. And then to add on top of that all of these terrifying, impending, biblical and demonic and terrible and awful elements on top of that, which we have no idea what they are or what this reality is or what is going on. So we are either as scared as Jacob or perhaps even more scared than Jacob, because we might be able to separate while watching the film in terms of watching the film as being in it versus just watching the film where you're thinking, oh my god, what's going to happen to this guy, and dreading that, and then on top of it you're sympathizing with him in the part of it at the same time. So perfect elements to put together and build on top of. I think I can go both ways on the ending. I do like the original ending in the film. However, I also like the alternate ending that is on the DVD or Blu-ray in the deleted scenes. But for our purposes, just speaking of the end of the film, it is this great moment of release for the audience, because we don't necessarily know yet in that scene where he goes up the stairs with Macaulay Culkin that this is the end of the film, or where he is going, or necessarily what is happening, because as soon as this scene is over, we will go to the jungle and find out that he dies there. However, in the moment, as a viewer, him being able to interact with his son again is what is so emotional for me and brings tears to my eyes. And then the fact that his son can have the calm, caring maturity to grab his father's hand and lead him. There's something stunning about that for me. And of course the music comes sweeping in, and not being religious, I guess that's sort of a representation of what people believe heaven is supposed to look like, or at least the stairs to it. Nowadays it's very common to say that the ending of the film is cheap, or sort of makes the whole film worthless or unimportant, because that does happen nowadays in films where I think that aren't written as well, or at least the third act isn't written before shooting starts or whatnot. But in this film, it's not a cheat or a ripoff. It was a stunning concept at the time. If you think of the writer writing both Ghost and this nearly the same time, and of course the two of them coming out at nearly the same time, and they're both stunningly fresh, fascinating takes on both the afterlife as well as passing on, or as they used to say, passing over. For me, the film is not depressing or sad, really. If anything, there is melancholy to it, but I would say that it's akin to the blues or jazz. People would say, well, why do you want to watch a film that is sad? And I would say, well, people listen to music that is sad. We call that blues. So there's something about the feeling, I think, that resonates with many viewers of the film. And I only hope that it gains somewhat more appreciation in time, and some more people see it, because it is so rewarding to a viewer or as a film student. Here are some thoughts by director Adrian Lyne.
Tim has a nice sense of humour. That's one of his nice traits, I think, is that even though he's going through nightmares here, he always has a sense of humour. I was anxious to keep all of these demonic elements rooted in flesh. The demonic imagery, the devil imagery, if you like. They were written in the screenplay by Bruce Rubens, really in terms of traditional kind of Judeo-Christian imagery. In other words, devils with tails and forked tongues and this sort of thing. And Hieronymus Bosch, for example, people had beaks and that sort of thing. And I was very anxious for us not to be able to laugh at it or dismiss it because of its familiarity. So I searched around for a long, long, long while, and we agonized over this, both of us, and eventually I came up with this feeling of thalidomide imagery. In other words, imagery that were like awful kind of grotesque extensions of, but always flesh. And I thought that would be much more frightening because it was less familiar. And so I went with that. The imagery that I used came out of Francis Bacon, the painter, for example. I also was very interested in the imagery of Joel Peter Witkin, the photographer. Elizabeth Pena has a nice kind of a sensuous quality, I think, which was important, really, when you think that Tim is just imagining all of this. But she also had to have a strength, a real strength for the demonic aspect of her character to work at the end of the movie. That was very important, and we had to think ahead to that. So I think she has this range. It's always interesting with a sequence like this, for this guy Jake being pushed down the corridor, is splitting it up, getting a kind of a variety in the shots, getting the close up of the wheels. And if you have a lot of cuts, you can give the scene more urgency. If you just have wide shots, medium shots, or whatever, you have no way of getting a kind of excitement to the scene. Following scene, really, this one here is kind of his descent into hell, if you like, and it was written really with kind of conventional sort of biblical images of hell, with hell literally flames and things like that. But I thought it was more interesting to kind of base it more in reality and have the wheels of this. It's almost like the infernal machine, the wheels of this cart taking him over different surfaces and them getting worse and worse and worse. Going. We used this. It was an abandoned hospital in Staten Island, and it was just an awful place to be. And you get a sense of this. And of course, this area now is where Brian Morris art directed it and added the limbs and the things that the cart is going over. I think the special effects stuff here is really good. This particular image was an image that I'd seen in the image of the man's masked head shaking like that. Was an image that I'd seen in a Joel Peter Witkin book. The bed that he's lying on here, Tim, is a striker bed, or rather kind of an adaptation of it. It's a bed that actually exists, but looks very sinister. I think what Louis says now is really central to the movie. I think it's everything that the movie's about. The idea that you're fighting death, seeing devils first. If you embrace death, you become angels. Now, the scene originally went on further, and Michael tells Jake that he has an antidote to cure the horrors that he's been going through. And there was a scene where he's given the antidote, and he goes through this horrendous experience, kind of an exorcism, if you like. And ostensibly at the end of this exorcism, he's cured. But we find out, in fact, that he isn't. But we can see this in the scenes that you can see shortly, the scenes that are being taken out at the end. It's a complicated movie in that it deals with different time sequences. It deals with Vietnam, that you think is in the past, and in fact isn't. In fact, Vietnam is the present. You are dealing with a sequence after Vietnam when he lives with Jesse, and you think that this is a reality, when in fact it's just imagined while he's dying in Vietnam. And you also have to deal with his memory of his relationship with his wife. So it's a very complicated movie. And it really felt, honestly, at the end that it was just one step too many. And I showed the movie with these additional scenes, with the antidote sequence in, and the audience really, I mean, they would come out of the movie catatonic, practically. And it was only reluctantly at the end that I took it out. And I often wonder now whether I should have left it in. But I think the way that we went was the simpler way, and certainly the more comprehensible way. But in the end, I would like to show it, and people can make their mind up for themselves. It was written as, I rather rudely used to call it the Liberace version. There was a version of him going up this enormous staircase with columns and angels and clouds, and really the religious idea of what heaven is going to be like, and I realized that it was interesting. I realized that I would never really be able to give you enough angels. I would never make it magnificent enough, and it would in the end be just, it would be a kind of tableau. And so I thought it was more moving, much more moving, honestly, the idea of home being heaven, your home being heaven, and the idea of him going upstairs with Gabe, with his son. And what I loved about it was that there's a kind of a role reversal at the end, that Gabe has a kind of maturity because he's been up there, he's been in heaven. He has a kind of maturity beyond his years, and he effectively is looking after his father. And I thought that was very moving, and I think works well in the movie. We used the title at the end to suggest that Jacob Singer was right in his assumption that they'd been experimented on. And certainly I've read accounts by different journalists that experimentation with a LSD type of drug did occur, although supposedly with the Viet Cong, with apparently disastrous results.
From the Seattle Times, Thursday, November 1st, 1990. Adrian Lyne met a metaphysical challenge, by John Hartle. For much of the past decade, Bruce Joel Rubin's Jacob's Ladder has been regarded as one of the great unproduced screenplays. It was an influential story about unfilmed scripts that was published several years ago. American Film Magazine called it one of the very few screenplays with the power to consistently raise hackles in broad daylight. The script for Jacob's Ladder began in 1980 with a dream Rubin had about being trapped in a subway. In his essay, Rubin writes that the story then came out of my head almost as if I were dreaming again. Nothing I had written in the past was so dark, so primal, so disturbing. Rubin acknowledges that the script is inspired as much by the Tibetan Book of the Dead as it is by the biblical tale of Jacob's Ladder and by Robert Enrico's Oscar-winning 1962 film of the Civil War story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Ridge, which also happens to be one of Adrian Lyne's favorite films. At one point, the screenplay detours into a discussion of the American government's drug experiments on soldiers in Vietnam. Part of the inspiration for this material was the Martin Lee and Bruce Schlane book, Acid Dreams, the CIA, LSD, and 60s Rebellion. For years, Rubin got more compliments than offers to film his heady mixture of politics, religion, and horror. The script first went to Universal Pictures' Tom Mount, who said he loved it, although it was not for his studio. Sidney Lumet and Michael Apted wanted to direct it, and Ridley Scott was almost committed to it shortly after he finished Blade Runner. Then the American Film Story broke and helped to turn it into a cult script. It actually did seem to serve as a challenge to Hollywood, a cinematic dare, Rubin writes. But still no one wanted to invest money in it, and his other scripts, including Ghost, which recently became the top-grossing film of 1990, were deemed too metaphysical. his agent told him that Hollywood does not make ghost movies. Rubin finally got a break with his script for Wes Craven's 1986 thriller, Deadly Friend, and Paramount picked up the rights to Ghost. Then an agent sent Jacob's Ladder to Adrian Lyne, who was planning to make Bonfire of the Vanities.
I was having a great deal of difficulty finding a script that I liked at all. I was reading stacks of stuff, and finally I spoke to Tracy Jacobs, who was an agent at ICM, my own agency, in fact. And I said, what have you read in the last 10 years? And this was, I suppose, 10 years ago now. What have you read in the last 10 years that you really, really like, that you think is special and hasn't been made? And she mentioned Jacob's Ladder. And I read it, and I was bowled over. And I especially liked it because it reminded me of a film I'd seen a long while ago, and I'd seen many, many times, called Incident at Owl Creek. It's a film made by Robert Enrico, a French director, and it was set in the American Civil War. And this movie, Jacob's Ladder, reminded me so much of Incident at Owl Creek. It was about a man who was found loitering near a bridge in the Civil War, in the American Civil War, and he was about to be hanged. And they kicked away the plank, and as he dropped, and you expected him to die and his neck to be broken, he gets away. Finally, you understand at the end of the movie that in fact he didn't get away, and that everything you've seen was in the split second of him dropping. And eventually at the end of the movie he's hanged, and this really is the basis for this movie. When I was preparing the movie, I saw a great many documentaries on Vietnam. There's a very good Time Life series that I saw, and it helped me a great deal with the way to shoot the Vietnam sequence. In this scene, I was trying to set up an almost lyrical kind of peaceful sort of feeling of just total fatigue, in between battles or whatever, because it would be a nice contrast for the mayhem that's about to happen.
H.R. Giger of Alien fame was one inspiration, but so was Francis Bacon, whose painting suggested a blurred, tormented look. Instead of a biblical hell, Lyne introduced a horrifying hospital sequence cluttered with the human debris of the Vietnam War, because that's what Jacob is going through. Lyne made other changes, introducing one character and reducing the impact of another. But he was committed to the uncompromising ending, which he regards as the one sacred feature of the script. Jacob's Ladder was all set to go at Paramount, where Ghost was also being shot, and where Fatal Attraction and Lyne's Flashdance had been filmed. But the Paramount regime changed, executives expressed doubts about the ending and the episodes in Vietnam, and the deal fell through. Then Coralco, the company that made Angel Heart and Total Recall, came in and saved the picture from being put on the shelf again. From an article on widerscreenings.com, filming the best unfilmed script in Hollywood. There are signs that Jacob's Ladder is finally getting the retrospective attention it truly warrants. Originally written by Bruce Joel Rubin, who would become one of Hollywood's most successful screenwriters after his work on Ghost, the script for Jacob's Ladder was ironically both highly regarded in the industry and yet thought unfilmable. It was even considered the best unfilmed script in Hollywood and written about in an article in the influential Journal of American Film. Yet it remained unmade until director Adrian Lyne was looking for a new project to follow his hit Fatal Attraction, and was handed the script after requesting something good and unusual. He subsequently took to the project with a visionary zeal not as evident in his fondness for high-concept modern morality plays. Indeed, within Lyne's accomplished filmography, Jacob's Ladder remains something of the odd film out, and many critics were thus somewhat unprepared for this remarkable, enigmatic, and even baffling film. And in the divisive reaction, there was an apparent tendency to dismiss it, in the part because of a general hostility towards the blend of sensationalism and sophisticated glossiness in Lyne's other works. Those who responded positively to it, however, were almost overawed by the movie, with some going so far as to claim that the film was designed so as to actually provoke or awaken a psychotic state within the viewer. Jacob's Ladder, a review by Roger Ebert, November 2nd, 1990, 3.5 stars out of 5. This movie left me reeling with turmoil and confusion, with feelings of sadness and despair. Those are the notes it strives for. Jacob's Ladder enters into the hallucinations of a desperate mind and lives there. It evokes a paranoid schizophrenic state as effectively as any film I have ever seen. Ordinarily, I am more than a little impatient with movies that deal with hallucinations, with dream states and delusions, because I feel artificially manipulated. The filmmakers are jerking my chain, and often it's a lazy substitute for the bother of constructing an intelligent screenplay. Jacob's Ladder is so well made, however, that I didn't feel impatient this time, because I didn't have the opportunity. The movie lives right on the raw edge of sanity and carries us along with it. Coming out of the film, riding down in the elevator with some fellow critics, I got involved in a conversation about the underlying reality of the film. Was it all a flashback or a flash forward? What was real and what was only in the hero's mind? Are even the apparently real sequences the product of his imagination? Making a chart of the real and imagined is not the point of Jacob's Ladder anyway. This movie is the portrait of a mental state. Rubin's original material, with its visions of demons and heaven and hell, has been replaced by the more frightening notion that paradise and the inferno are all about us here on earth, and that we participate in one or the other almost by choice. What Jacob's Ladder really wants to do is to evoke the feeling of a psychological state in the audience. We are intended to feel what the hero feels. A lesser film would have ended with some dumb denouement in a courtroom or some shootout with government security guys. This is a film about no less than life and death, and Jacob seems to stand at the midpoint of a ladder that reaches in two directions. Up to heaven, like the ladder that God put down for the biblical Jacob in Genesis, or down to hell in drug-induced hallucinations. This movie was not a pleasant experience, but it was exhilarating, in the sense that I was able to observe filmmakers working at the peak of their abilities and inspirations. Not every movie has to be fun. From an article written in 2006 by James Berardinelli, Jacob's Ladder belongs to a genre of movies glibly referred to as mind fucks. That is to say, the movie enjoys toying with the viewer's perceptions and expectations. It's weird and surreal, but it ends with most of the holes plugged and all but a few of the loose ends tied into a tidy package. Some argue this is a cheat and the film should have been more open-ended. That's a personal choice. I like it the way it is. The film takes literally the idea that a man's entire life might flash before him in the instant before death. Jacob's Ladder plays with reality in a way that would become commonplace in the next decade or so, especially with the films of David Lynch. However, compared to Mulholland Drive, Jacob's Ladder is almost straightforward. Jacob's Ladder invites participation and is an intellectually stimulating experience. Even for those who know the ending, there's still pleasure to be had in piecing together the puzzle and figuring out how everything fits together. Jacob's Ladder, Dreams and Consciousness, Hollywood Style, written by Kelly Bulkley, University of Chicago. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is considered one of the most profound works ever written on the mysteries of consciousness, dreams, lucidity, spirituality, and the subtle relations between life and death. This ancient Buddhist treatise has fascinated people for centuries. That the venerable Tibetan Book of the Dead could be one of the main inspirations for the 1990 release of Hollywood's Jacob's Ladder may sound unlikely if not absurd. Hollywood films are not renowned for sensitive portrayals of metaphysical anxiety and spiritual struggles with the ultimate questions of human existence. But the brilliant, bewitching movie Jacob's Ladder shows that popular films can, in fact, effectively explore the strange realms of dream, fantasy, vision, and memory. Themes and images from the Tibetan Book of the Dead run throughout Jacob's Ladder. The Buddhist classic is primarily intended as a guide for the dying person, to help him or her navigate the transition from one existence to another. The most important message of the book is that the dying person must learn how to distinguish between the different fears, dangers, trials, and temptations he or she will experience in making that transition. This is exactly what Jacob Singer struggles with, the nearly impossible task of understanding the true nature of the various dreams and visions he is experiencing. He gets caught up in many of the nightmarish situations described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. For example, calling out and not being heard, being paralyzed, suffering extremes of heat and cold, being chased by unknown assailants, and enduring bodily mutilation and disintegration. One of the most harrowing scenes of the film has Jacob being wheeled on a stretcher from an ordinary hospital room down increasingly dark, deserted hallways that are first dirty, then spattered with blood, and then grotesquely littered with body parts and shreds of flesh. As with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the heart of Jacob's Ladder is a quest for release from worldly entanglements, from persistent memories, from terrifying fears, even from comforting pleasures. Jacob does not understand what is happening to him, and so he fights against his experiences, against the endless shifts of reality, against the transformation he is undergoing. He tries to hold on to some aspects of his world and push away from the other aspects. Only when he realizes the true nature of his condition, when he realizes he is desperately clinging to a state of existence that must pass away, does Jacob finally achieve release. As the title suggests, the film also makes abundant use of Judeo-Christian symbolism. Jezebel is the woman in 1 Kings 16:18 who marries the Israelite king Ahab and leads the people into the blasphemy of worshiping Baal rather than the Lord Jehovah. Gabriel is the archangel who announces to Mary in Luke 1 that she is to bear the Son of God. And Jacob is the Hebrew patriarch who has the astounding dream in Genesis 28 of a ladder spanning heaven and earth. The film weaves these biblical references into an essentially Buddhist story of enlightenment, suggesting that the Judeo-Christian yearning for salvation and the Buddhist quest for release are ultimately one. A credit at movie's conclusion states that during the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army reportedly experimented with a hallucinogenic drug called VZ, although the Pentagon denies it. The suggestion is that Jacob's experiences could have a factual basis. What Jacob suffered might really have happened. This marvelously confounding statement draws the audience directly into the mystery of Jacob's Ladder. Was the film real or not? What is real? What does it mean to us if the film included the real experiences of a real person? This sort of concluding statement is a literary device that Hindu and Buddhist myths frequently use to blur the lines between the story and the audience, and thus to force the members of the audience to ask themselves whether they are actually in the story. The ending of Jacob's Ladder has this exact effect. After seeing the movie, we cannot help but wonder about our own perceptions, our own abilities to distinguish clearly between dreams, wishes, memories, and reality. Jacob Singer's awful predicament is really ours too. Vietnam certainly has been a nightmare experience for American society, a painful encounter with suffering, violence, and death. Jacob's Ladder suggests that perhaps we, like Jacob, have not woken up from that nightmare. Perhaps we are still in some sense trapped in that existence without fully realizing it. Perhaps some of the horrors of our present reality are due to the fact that we have not yet sorted out the desires, fears, fantasies, and wounds that we as a society experienced in Vietnam. Jacob's Ladder, despite its Hollywood pedigree, succeeds in recreating that sense of awe and mystery that has made the Tibetan Book of the Dead one of the world's enduring spiritual classics. Even more remarkably, the film makes a powerful statement about how the metaphysical exploration of dreams, consciousness, and memory is terribly relevant to contemporary Americans and their society. Review by Michael Nordine, October 3rd, 2011. Jacob's Ladder is engrossing enough to make you feel like part of its claustrophobic world, despite how badly you want to escape. This is in spite of the fact that overt moments of horror are relatively infrequent. Adrian Lyne's movie cultivates fear largely via the viewer's ability to fill in the blanks with his or her own thoughts and projections. As tends to be the case, the result is an occasional urge to avert your eyes from the screen, afraid of what will or won't happen next. A cold viewing would have you believe, at least for the first several minutes, that you'd stumbled upon a war movie. Jacob's Ladder only belongs to the horror genre insofar as it understands its conventions well enough to simultaneously borrow from and transcend them. In the process, it becomes something else altogether. When transplanted into a story about a man haunted by both his wartime experience and the death of his young son, it's mostly just sad. As much as anything, this movie is about the power of perception, of understanding our own demons, not as the manifestation of our deepest fears, but as something to put behind us. Expressed via a quotation relating to the duality between angels and demons, delivered by Jake's strangely angelic chiropractor. This comes as a revelatory burst of wisdom for our protagonist. In biblical terms, Jacob's Ladder is a means of reaching heaven. That may be true here as well, but one must first descend into hell to understand the difference. From the website Genre Busters, in its top 100. Number 87, Jacob's Ladder, written by D. Davis. Jacob's Ladder is a glorious and frightening trip into a personal hell, filmed, written, and acted with great skill. It's hard to describe the narrative for this film without giving too much away, and Jacob's Ladder is a film that is fun to figure out. It might be easier to discuss what the film is about without using concrete examples or plot points. Jacob's Ladder is about many things and is comprised of layers that slowly get peeled away to reveal more mysteries. The film's narrative touches upon the Vietnam War, experimental drugs, heaven and hell, and angels and demons. The scope of the narrative is remarkable, and the way the plot is revealed through subtle visual clues is commendable. The direction by Adrian Lyne, a director known more for sexual thrillers than for psychological horror, is amazing. He keeps a tight rein on the impending chaos and doom, and always shows just enough to leave the audience wanting more. What is half seen is infinitely more powerful than what is blatantly shown, and Adrian Lyne preys upon this knowledge with glee. Jacob's Ladder is full of memorable sequences and images, both grotesque and beautiful, and this is the aesthetic duality that defines the gripping nature of the film. The visual elements, all practical shots, are used to extraordinary effect and are not shown only for shock value. Each time one of the demons or monstrosities appears, we know that something important is going down. Through a series of hallucinations, Jacob's life seems to crumble as he is slowly losing touch with reality itself. What is most interesting about these hellish sequences is the way Lyne commits to the idea. We never once see Jacob in any of these hallucinations. We only see what Jacob sees, and so we know we are in the head of the character whose point of view may be untrustworthy. Like a great author, Lyne uses different point of views in the film to depict the various tones. The film is also brimming with religious symbolism, some subtle, some overt. Having overt and blatant religious symbolism can sometimes act as a double-edged sword. Sometimes easy symbolism in lieu of real character development comes off as being lazy. However, such is not the case with Jacob's Ladder. The film's narrative hinges upon theological ideas, and by having characters with biblical names that mirror their biblical counterparts, the symbolism gives way to strong archetypes the audience can latch onto. In a word, Jacob's Ladder is gripping. It is also frightening, disturbing, entertaining, and incredibly well made. This is a film that transcends mere genre conventions. That is, it becomes more than just a horror film, in doing so by offering up compelling characters and situations. The horror presented by the narrative becomes all the more tangible and immediate. Jacob's Ladder offers feelings of real terror and doom, feelings that are exemplified by the characters, and feelings that are grounded in reality and religious symbolism and mythology. Trivia for Jacob's Ladder from the Internet Movie Database. For all of the chiropractic scenes, director Adrian Lyne ensured there was a real chiropractor on set who would work with actor Danny Aiello so as to ensure authenticity. According to Lyne, chiropractors often approach him and thank him for going to the trouble of getting what they do exactly right. Actors who were allegedly interested in playing the leading role of Jacob Singer included Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino, Richard Gere, Mickey Rourke, and Don Johnson. For the role of Jezzy, director Adrian Lyne auditioned roughly 300 women, including Julia Roberts, Andie MacDowell, Madonna, and Jennifer Lopez. The role eventually went to the very first person who auditioned, Elizabeth Pena. The film won the Avioraz Fantastic Film Festival, 1991, both the Audience Award and the Critics Award. Postmodernism in Jacob's Ladder, submitted by Maddie Oy on April 28, 2009. The film Jacob's Ladder presents a postmodern theme to the audience. Throughout the movie, the audience is left guessing, and the entire film seems to be a random chain of events. The end of the movie leaves the audience questioning whether they have enjoyed the film or they have not. Because of the film's theme, it has many different moods and elements of postmodernism. The film leaves an impression on the audience, an impression that not everything is what it seems. The audience is supposed to question what is real and fake. The series of events that Jacob encounters are very subjective, due to the fact that nothing that happens throughout the film is actually taking place. It is all scenarios he is putting himself in as he is dying. The only part of the movie that is real is the war. The dreams or nightmares he is having resembles his life and whether he is going to heaven or hell. As he is dying, the nightmares all consist of demons and devils trying to tempt or kill him. Jacob does not allow himself to find inner peace and continues to be tempted by the demons, bringing himself a step down on the ladder to heaven. There are many different people in his life that he views as demons and angels. Jacob has 3 boys named Gabriel, Jebediah, and Elijah, all biblical names. His 3 sons are viewed as angels. Jacob also has a chiropractor that looks after him and takes care of him like a guardian angel. In Jacob's nightmares, he is dating a woman named Jezebel. Jezebel acts like a succubus and is like a demon that is keeping him down. These signs of angels and demons is an element of postmodernism. The form and structure of the film support the postmodern theme because there is an emphasis on how sight takes place. There is a movement away from the apparent objectivity provided by omniscient third-person narrators, and there is an emphasis on the random-seeming collages of different materials. In closing, thank you so very much for taking the time to download and listen. Listener participation is encouraged, so please write to TheSilverHalideShow @gmail.com. For show notes or other archived podcast episodes, please visit TheSilverHalideShow.blogspot.com.